Tokyo, Japan, October 1971. Let me take you there. Because Tokyo in October is a specific thing that no other city produces. The summer heat has finally broken. The air is clean, genuinely clean. The particular clarity that comes to Tokyo in autumn when the humidity drops and the light changes and the city reveals itself in a way it doesn't quite manage in any other season. Cool mornings, warm afternoons, the smell of food from street vendors mixing with something that is just the smell of Tokyo concrete and history, and 10 million people going about the business of being one of the greatest cities on earth. And in October 1971, Tokyo is at a specific moment in its history. The 1964 Olympics were 7 years ago. The city rebuilt itself for those Olympics: roads, infrastructure, the Shinkansen, the whole modern face of Tokyo, and that rebuilt city is now 7 years old and settling into itself, becoming comfortable with what it is. A city that is ancient and modern simultaneously, that holds both without apology, that has been doing this for long enough that it no longer feels like contradiction. The traditional and the contemporary, side by side, every day. And nowhere is this more visible, nowhere is this tension more alive, more present, more felt than in the world of sumo. Let me tell you about sumo. Because if you think you know sumo, if your understanding of sumo is the broad cultural image, the large men, the ceremony, the theatrical elements, then you don't know sumo. Not really. Not what it is underneath the image. Sumo is the oldest organized sport in Japan. Not one of the oldest. The oldest, 2,000 years of recorded history, 2,000 years of formalized competition, of refined technique, of a sport that has been continuously practiced and transmitted from practitioner to practitioner across 100 generations without breaking the chain. In those 2,000 years, the sport has developed 70 official techniques, 70, each one named, catalogued, studied, each one the product of thousands of practitioners over hundreds of years finding the most efficient way to accomplish a specific objective in a specific situation. There is no wasted motion in sumo, not at the highest level. Everything that looks ceremonial is functional. Everything that looks theatrical is precise. The dohyo, the ring, the clay circle 4.55 meters in diameter is not a stage. It's a problem. The problem is to push your opponent out of it or force any part of his body other than the sole of his foot to touch the clay. That's it. That's the whole problem. 2,000 years of refining the solution and the practitioners, the rikishi. To reach the top division of sumo, the makuchi, a man must have dedicated years of his life to this sport, beginning typically in his mid-teens. He has left his family. He has moved into a training stable, a haya, where he lives and eats and trains under conditions that the outside world would find difficult to understand. He wakes at 5 in the morning. He trains for 4 hours on an empty stomach. He eats twice a day enormous meals, specifically constructed to build the specific kind of mass that sumo requires. He sleeps. He trains again. This is his life. Every day. For years. Sometimes decades. The men who reach the top of this system are not simply large. They are specifically, purposefully, technically large. Their mass is a tool, developed and refined and applied with the same intentionality that a sprinter applies to speed or a gymnast applies to flexibility. And at the very top of this system, at the rank of Yokozuna, the grand champion, is Koi Yamamoto. Koi Yamamoto. He is 31 years old, born in Aomori Prefecture, northern Japan. He entered his training stable at 15. He reached the top division at 19. He was promoted to Yokozuna, the highest rank in sumo, the rank that fewer than 100 men have held in the entire history of the sport at 26. He has held the rank for 5 years. He is 6'2". He weighs 380 pounds. And unlike almost everything else in this world that weighs 380 pounds, Koji Yamamoto moves. Not quickly, not by the standards of, say, a boxer or a sprinter, but with a specific, controlled, devastating speed that is completely disproportionate to his mass. This is what training produces: the specific athletic adaptation of a body that has been pushed in the same direction every day for 16 years. His first step from the starting position, the tachi, the initial charge, covers the 4.55-meter dohyo in less than a second. 380 pounds, crossing a competition sumo ring in less than a second. Think about what that means. Think about what it means to have 380 pounds of controlled mass arriving at you in less than a second. His technique is extraordinary. 5 years as Yokozuna, undefeated in his last tournament, 15 bouts, 15 victories. The previous tournament, 15 bouts, 15 victories. The one before that, and the one before that. He has not lost a tournament in 2 years. He has not been pushed out of a dohyo in 17 consecutive matches. 17 consecutive matches without being pushed out of the ring, against the best sumo wrestlers in Japan, against men who weigh between 280 and 400 pounds and have dedicated their lives to the specific art of pushing other large men out of rings. He is, by any honest assessment, the most dominant sumo wrestler alive. He is also, and this matters for what happens in October 1971, a man with opinions, specific opinions, held with the specific confidence of someone who has been the best at something for a long time and has had those opinions validated repeatedly by results. His opinions about martial arts that are not sumo are particularly specific. The occasion is a dinner, a formal dinner at a Tokyo restaurant near the Kokugikan, the National Sumo Hall, attended by perhaps 30 people. Business figures, cultural figures, 1 or 2 government officials, some people from the entertainment industry. The kind of event that happens in Tokyo regularly, business conducted in the format of cultural appreciation, relationships maintained over food and conversation. Bruce Lee is there because of a film. He is in Tokyo on a production meeting. The film will eventually become Enter the Dragon. The meetings are going well. He has been in Tokyo for 4 days, and he has done what he always does in a new city: observed, trained, studied, moved through the place with the specific quality of attention he brings to everywhere he goes. He's been to the Kokugikan. He watched a sumo practice session from the public viewing area. He watched for 3 hours. Nobody knew who he was. He was just a small Asian man in the viewing area watching the wrestlers train. He has opinions about what he saw. Those opinions he is keeping to himself. Tonight he is at this dinner. He is there because a studio executive brought him as a guest. He is seated at a table toward the back of the room, not the main table, not the featured position, near 2 Japanese film industry, people who are polite and curious and speak enough English for the conversation to work. He is eating, listening to the room, watching. At the main table, holding court, is Koji Yamamoto. Yamamoto, at a social occasion, is a specific presence. Not loud, sumo wrestlers of his rank have a dignity that doesn't require volume. But present, the room organizes itself around him the way rooms organize themselves around certain people. The center of gravity. Conversations happen in relation to him. He's talking about sumo, about the tournament season just ending, about technique, about his opponents, about the state of the sport. And then, as conversations do when sumo wrestlers are at the table, about martial arts more broadly, about the relationship between sumo and other fighting forms, about what sumo is and what it isn't. Yamamoto has views. He always has views. He says, sumo is the foundation of all Japanese martial arts. It is the oldest. It is the most tested. It is the most honest because you cannot fake it. You are pushed out of the ring or you are not. The result is immediate and definitive. No points, no judges, no interpretation. The ring tells you everything. The people around him are nodding. He says, the other arts, karate, judo, these modern things, they have their value for fitness, for discipline, for young men who need structure. He pauses. As fighting, he makes a gesture. Controlled, dismissive. As real fighting, against real opposition, against real weight, he looks around the table. He says, Chinese Kung Fu I find, particularly he searches for the word theatrical. It is beautiful, like a dance, very beautiful dance. He pauses. But it is not fighting. Against a real opponent with real weight, these flowery movements accomplish nothing. Against sumo, against real mass, Kung Fu is decoration. The table laughs. Politely. The laughter of people who find the observation agreeable. And from the back of the room, quietly. In Japanese that is careful but functional. I would respectfully disagree. The room turns. This happens in stages. The table nearest the voice first, then spreading outward. 30 people locating the source of a voice that has just disagreed with the yokozuna in his own city at a dinner in his honor. They find the small man at the back table. Dark jacket, maybe 5'7", 135 pounds, in a room where the featured guest weighs 380. He is sitting calmly with chopsticks in his hand and a mild expression, and he has just, in functional Japanese, disagreed with the grand champion of sumo about kung fu. The room is uncertain. This is Tokyo. Directness of this kind requires courage or ignorance. The question is which one? Yamamoto looks at him. He says, You speak Japanese. The small man says, Some. Enough. Yamamoto says, And you know kung fu? The small man says, I practice it. Yes. Yamamoto says, You practice kung fu, and you disagree that it is theatrical. The small man says, I disagree that theatrical is the right word. I think you saw theatrical kung fu. He pauses. Not all kung fu is what you saw. Yamamoto looks at him for a long moment. He says, And you? What you practice? This is different. The small man says, I believe so. Yes. And Yamamoto says, Different how? The small man says, I could show you, if you're interested. The room is absolutely still. The studio executive who brought the small man is looking at him with the expression of someone who has just understood that his evening has departed significantly from what he planned. Yamamoto looks at the small man for a long time. He says, You are proposing a demonstration. The small man says, I'm proposing an answer to the question. He meets Yamamoto's eyes. You made a specific claim. A demonstration is the most efficient way to test it. Yamamoto says, I outweigh you by 245 pounds. The small man says, I know. Yamamoto says, I am the yokozuna. The small man says, I know that too. Yamamoto is quiet. Something is happening in him. He is interested, not threatened, not angry, genuinely interested. Because in 30 years of life and 16 years of sumo, this has not happened. A small man at a dinner table in his honor has looked at 380 pounds and 5 years of yokozuna and said calmly, without performance, with the specific directness of someone who means what they say, I would respectfully disagree. And then offered to demonstrate. He says, after dinner, the restaurant has a private room in the back. Traditional, wooden floors, enough space. The tables are moved, a clear area of perhaps 8 tatami mats worth of floor space, 30 people, all of them staying. Nobody has left. Nobody was going to leave. Yamamoto has changed into training clothes. He is, in training clothes, a different thing than he is in formal wear. The full reality of 380 pounds of yokozuna is visible now, the specific width of his shoulders, the mass of his legs, the legs that drive the tachiai, the initial charge, the sub-1 second crossing of the dohyo, the deliberate, specific, weaponized mass of 16 years of sumo training. He stands in the center of the cleared space. He looks at the small man. The small man has removed his jacket. He is in his dark shirt and trousers. No special equipment, no training clothes. He looks at Yamamoto across the cleared space. Yamamoto says, "We use the sumo format. You push me out of this space," he indicates a rough circle of perhaps 5 meters, "or I push you out, or any part of the body other than the feet touches the floor." He pauses. He says, "I will not use full technique. I will not strike, only pushing and pulling. We are demonstrating, not fighting." The small man says, "Agreed." Yamamoto says, "If you touch the floor or leave the space, we stop, and your claim is answered." The small man says, "And if I don't?" Yamamoto says, "Then my claim is answered." He bows. The small man bows. 30 people in a private room in a Tokyo restaurant lean forward simultaneously. Yamamoto moves. The tachiai. The initial charge of sumo. The moment that every sumo match begins with. 2 men at the starting line, and then explosion. Forward, low, fast, controlled, everything behind it. 380 pounds, moving at the speed that 380 pounds of sumo training produces. The small man is not there. He has moved. Sideways. 1 step. The Tachi eye passes through the space where he was, and Yamamoto's momentum carries him forward past where the contact should have been. Yamamoto stops himself. Turns. The room makes no sound. Yamamoto looks at the small man, who is standing where he was, -1 step to the left, watching, waiting. Yamamoto has charged like this in hundreds of matches, against men who outweigh this small man by 100, 150 pounds, against the best sumo wrestlers in Japan. The tachi-ai is the foundation of everything. You establish contact and then you work. Without contact, there is no sumo. There is only running into empty air. He just ran into empty air. He resets. He moves again. More controlled this time. More measured. Not the full tachi-ai approach. Reaching forward with both hands to establish the grip at the mawashi, the belt, the fundamental gripping point of sumo. Get the grip, get the belt grip, and everything else follows. With the belt grip and 380 pounds, the outcome is not uncertain. The small man's hands come up. They don't block. They meet Yamamoto's reaching arms at the wrists. Light contact. And then a movement that takes maybe half a second. They redirect. Yamamoto's reaching arms go slightly offline. The angle changes. The grip reaches where the mawashi was and is no longer. Yamamoto disengage. He stands. He looks at the small man. He says in Japanese, quietly, more to himself than to the room, "You moved my arms." The small man says, "I redirected the direction, not the force." Yamamoto says, "There is a difference?" The small man says, "A large one." Yamamoto processes this. He tries again. This time he reaches lower. Below the arms, going for the body directly. If he can get both arms around the body lock, 380 pounds of yokozuna with a body lock is physics. Irresistible physics. He drives forward and reaches. The small man drops his level. Simultaneously, his hands find Yamamoto's shoulders, that light, specific, 2 pound of contact, touch and apply direction, downward and forward, into Yamamoto's own forward momentum. Yamamoto's forward momentum meets a small downward direction applied at exactly the right angle and continues forward and down. And for 1 single half second, Yamamoto's balance is wrong. His weight is ahead of his feet by a fraction. Just a fraction. His right hand touches the floor. He catches himself immediately. Straightens. Stands. He looks at his hand. He looks at the small man. The room is not breathing. Yamamoto says, "That would be a loss." The small man says, "Yes, in your format." Yamamoto says, "My hand touched." The small man says, "Yes." Yamamoto is very quiet. In 5 years as yokozuna, in 17 consecutive matches, in 16 years of sumo, his hand has not touched the floor in that way, in that context. At the moment when it touched, he was not falling. He caught himself. He recovered. But the touch happened. He looks at the small man. He says, 135 pounds made my hand touch the floor. The small man says, your momentum made your hand touch the floor. I just suggested a direction for it. Yamamoto stands with this. He is a man who has spent his life understanding force, understanding mass, understanding the specific language of two large bodies in contact, and the physics of who goes out of the ring and who stays. He knows force, he knows mass. He does not know this. This thing the small man did, this reading of the momentum, the finding of the direction, the application of 2 pounds of force at the right angle and the right moment. He says, where does a man learn this? The small man says, you learn to watch, not the body, the intention, before the body moves. Yamamoto says, the intention. The small man says, every movement starts before it starts. The body prepares before it acts. If you can read the preparation, Yamamoto says, you already know the action. Small man says, yes. Yamamoto looks at him. He says, in sumo we read the eyes, the feet. We look for the signal of the tachi eye. The small man says, I know. I watched your practice session at the Kokugikan. Yamamoto blinks. He says, you were there? The small man says, 3 days ago. Public viewing area. 3 hours. Yamamoto says, what did you see? The small man is quiet for a moment. He says, I saw the greatest sumo technique I have ever seen. He says it directly, without flattery. Your tachi eye is extraordinary. The speed of it for your mass is something I have not seen before. Yamamoto waits. The small man says, and I saw that the preparation is visible. 2 seconds before the tachi eye, your left foot shifts. A fraction. Almost nothing. But it shifts. Yamamoto goes completely still. He says, the left foot. The small man says, yes. Yamamoto says, no one has told me this. The small man says, perhaps no one was looking for it. Yamamoto turns this over. His left foot, for 16 years. The preparation for the charge. He has never known it was visible. His coaches have never told him. His opponents, the best sumo wrestlers in Japan, have never used it. Because they were not looking for it. Because they were reading the eyes, the feet in a general sense, the conventional signals, not the specific fractional shift of the left foot 2 seconds before the charge. This small man watched one practice session from the public viewing area and found it. They spend 90 minutes in that private room. The 30 guests have been standing for 90 minutes. Nobody has moved to sit down. Nobody has checked the time or looked at their phone or had a conversation with the person next to them. 30 people standing in a private room in a Tokyo restaurant for 90 minutes watching. Watching what? Not a fight. Not a demonstration in the conventional sense. Something harder to name. 2 men in a cleared space exchanging something technique, principle, understanding, Yamamoto charging, and the small man moving around it. The small man showing Yamamoto where the momentum goes when the target is not there. Yamamoto asking questions in Japanese, receiving answers, asking more questions. The studio executive who brought the small man gave up trying to understand what is happening around the 40-minute mark and simply watched. Like everyone else, at the 90-minute mark, Yamamoto stops. He stands in the center of the cleared space. 380 pounds in training clothes, 5 years as Yokozuna, the grand champion of the oldest organized sport in Japan. He looks at the small man. He says, I said, Kung Fu was theatrical. The small man waits. Yamamoto says, I was describing what I had seen, not what exists. He pauses. He says, what you do, he considers his words carefully, is not theatrical. He meets the small man's eyes. It is the opposite of theatrical. It is, he searches for the word, invisible. What you do is invisible. I felt it. I could not see it coming. The small man says, that's the point. If you can see it coming, you can stop it. Yamamoto nods. He says, "You are a small man." The small man says, "Yes." Yamamoto says, 135 pounds. The small man says, "Approximately." Yamamoto says, "My hand touched the floor." He says it again. Not with shame, with the specific honesty of a man who has spent his life in a sport where results are immediate and definitive and cannot be argued with. The ring tells you everything. His hand touched the floor. That tells him something. He bows. Full sumo bow. Deep. Formal. The bow a yokozuna gives to another yokozuna. The small man bows back. Same depth. Same formality. The 30 guests make a sound. Not applause exactly. Something that comes from the same place as applause, but isn't quite it. The sound of people who have witnessed something and are acknowledging it with the only instrument they have, which is their voices. Afterward, later that evening, the guests have left. The room is being restored to its original arrangement. Yamamoto is seated at one of the replaced tables, drinking tea. The small man is seated across from him, just the two of them now. The translator has been dismissed. Yamamoto's Japanese is formal. The small man's is functional. Between them, they find enough language for what they want to say. Yamamoto says, "In 16 years. The left foot. Nobody told me." The small man says, "It's very small. You would have to be looking for it." Yamamoto says, "Will you tell me more about it? What you saw?" The small man looks at him. He says, "The shift happens when you decide. Before you move, the decision is in the foot." Yamamoto says, "And you can see the decision." The small man says, "If you're watching for it, yes." And Harpad from Harpad.com key. Thus, Yamamoto says, "Can it be corrected?" The small man thinks for a moment. He says, "The shift is how your body prepares for the explosion. It may be structural. Removing it might change the charge itself." He pauses. "The question is whether the signal matters. In sumo against sumo opponents, probably not. They're not looking for it." He looks at Yamamoto. He says, "Against someone who is looking for it, it matters." Yamamoto says, "Like tonight." The small man says, "Like tonight." Yamamoto holds his teacup. "Thinking," he says, "you watched 3 hours of practice from the public area. You found this in 3 hours." The small man says, "I was looking for it, specifically." Yamamoto says, "Why?" The small man says, "Because I wanted to understand how the Tachi eye works. What makes it work." He pauses. "To understand something, you have to find where it has limits. The limit is where the understanding is." Yamamoto says, "And the limit of the Tachi eye," the small man says, "is that it commits fully." He meets Yamamoto's eyes. The full commitment is what makes it powerful. It's also what makes it readable. He pauses. These are not separate things. They're the same thing. Yamamoto is quiet for a long moment. He says, "In sumo, we say," he translates carefully, "we say, the man who hesitates is already losing." The small man says, "Yes." Yamamoto says, "So we do not hesitate. We commit completely." The small man says, "And complete commitment is readable." Yamamoto says, "So the strength is the weakness." The small man says, "The strength is the weakness." Yes. Yamamoto says this in Japanese, to himself. Quietly, he says, "I have been in sumo for 16 years. He looks at the small man. "No one has said this to me." The small man says, "Perhaps because in sumo it doesn't matter." He pauses. "You're always facing sumo. Sumo against sumo. The full commitment is correct. Against full commitment wins." He looks at Yamamoto. The rule changes when the opposition is not using the same commitment. Yamamoto says, "Like tonight." The small man says, "Like tonight." They drink tea in silence for a moment. Yamamoto says, "You are filming here." "In Tokyo," the small man says. "Production meetings." "Yes." Yamamoto says. "How long are you here?" The small man says, "4 more days." Yamamoto says, "Will you come to the Kokugikan tomorrow morning?" "To the practice session, not the public viewing area." Inside, the small man looks at him. He says, "Yes." He goes to the Kokugikan the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. Not training, not learning sumo, that's not what this is. But watching and being watched, and exchanging something that doesn't have a name in either Japanese or English. Yamamoto watching him move. The small man watching Yamamoto work. Questions and answers in mixed language that find enough shared vocabulary for the exchange to function. On the third morning, Yamamoto asks him to demonstrate something on one of the junior wrestlers. A large young man, 260 pounds, 2 years into his training. Yamamoto wants to see the redirection principle applied to someone who is moving at real sumo speed. The small man looks at the young wrestler. He says, "May I?" The young wrestler looks at Yamamoto. Yamamoto nods. The young wrestler does what young sumo wrestlers do when they are told to demonstrate with someone. He charges. Not the refined tachiai of a yokozuna he's 2 years in. The refinement isn't there yet, but 260 pounds moving fast and forward and committed. The small man moves. 1 step. Inside the charge. His hands find the young wrestler's shoulders at the moment of full commitment and apply the specific light, directional pressure. 260 pounds of committed forward momentum continues in the direction it was going, which is now slightly offline from where the small man is, and the young wrestler stumbles past him. Yamamoto watches. He says, "The same thing." The small man says, "The same principle." The technique adjusts for the individual. The principle doesn't change. Yamamoto says, "The principle doesn't change with the weight." The small man says, "The principle is not about the weight." Yamamoto says, "It's about the commitment." The small man says, "Yes." Yamamoto nods. He says something in Japanese to the young wrestler. The young wrestler bows to the small man and returns to his training. Yamamoto looks at the small man. He says, "At the dinner, when I said Kung Fu was theatrical," he pauses. "I believed it. I had seen enough of it to believe it." The small man says, "What you saw was probably theatrical." Yamamoto says, "But not all of it." The small man says, "No, not all of it." Yamamoto says, "How does a man know which is which?" The small man looks at him. He says, "The same way you know anything real from anything performed." He pauses. You feel it. He meets Yamamoto's eyes. "Tonight your hand touched the floor. That was real. Nothing performed would have made your hand touch the floor." Yamamoto says, "No, nothing performed." He is quiet. He says, "I owe you a correction." At the dinner. "The claim I made," the small man says, "you made it honestly. Based on what you'd seen." Yamamoto says, "It was still wrong." The small man says, "Most things said with absolute certainty are slightly wrong." He pauses. "The certainty is what makes them wrong." He almost smiles. "Your sumo is not wrong. Your claim about sumo is not wrong. The absolute, the no exceptions, that's where it went wrong." Yamamoto says, "Because there are exceptions." The small man says, "There are always exceptions." He leaves Tokyo 4 days after the dinner. Yamamoto is at the Kokugikan when he goes. Morning practice. They bow to each other in the corridor outside the main practice hall. Formal. Correct. The bow of 2 men who have exchanged something real. Yamamoto says, "When Enter the Dragon is released, I will watch it." The small man says, "It's a film, not a demonstration." Yamamoto says, "I know the difference now." The small man nods. He says, What you do in that ring is extraordinary. He says it directly, without qualification. In 2000 years, your sport has produced technique that is, he pauses, genuinely extraordinary. What you do with 380 pounds is not what I can do. He meets Yamamoto's eyes. I'm not saying otherwise. Yamamoto says, but? The small man says, no but. Just it's extraordinary. And it has limits. Like everything. Yamamoto says, as does your system. The small man says, absolutely. Yes. Yamamoto says, what are the limits of your system? The small man thinks for a moment. He says, a man who cannot be read. He pauses. I read intention. I read preparation. If the preparation is completely hidden, if the body gives nothing away before the movement, then I have no information. He pauses. That man would be very difficult. He looks at Yamamoto. He says, you are not that man yet. The left foot. Yamamoto says, I know. The small man says, but you could be. Yamamoto looks at him. The small man says, if you understood what the foot is doing and learned to suppress it or distribute it differently. He pauses. You would be very difficult. Yamamoto says, I will work on this. The small man says, I know. He bows. Yamamoto bows. They part. Koji Yamamoto is Yokozuna for 3 more years after October 1971. He retires in 1974, undefeated in his final 2 tournaments. He is considered by historians of the sport one of the greatest yokozuna of the 20th century. His tachi in those final 3 years is something that the sumo analysts and the veteran coaches notice but cannot fully explain. Something has changed. Not in the speed, not in the power, in the preparation. The tell that experienced observers had learned to read in Yamamoto's tachi the fractional shift before the charge is gone, or suppressed, or distributed differently so that it no longer arrives as a single readable signal. His opponents, already excellent sumo wrestlers dealing with a yokozuna, find in those final 3 years that they cannot read the tachi the way they could before. They lose more completely, more quickly. Nobody understands exactly why the change happened. Yamamoto's coaches notice it. They don't know what caused it. They record that his tachi became, in this period, unusually difficult to anticipate. That's the phrase in the records. Unusually difficult to anticipate. There's a journalist, Japanese sports writer. He spent 20 years covering sumo. He interviewed Yamamoto twice, once during his active career, once after his retirement. In the retirement interview, he asked Yamamoto about his career, about the highlights, about what he was proudest of. Yamamoto talked about the championships, about specific matches, about the specific technical evolution of his sumo. And then the journalist asked, was there ever a moment that changed how you understood the sport? Yamamoto was quiet for a moment. He said, yes. The journalist waited. Yamamoto said, a dinner in Tokyo, October 1971. The journalist asked, what happened? Yamamoto said, a small man disagreed with something I said. The journalist asked, about sumo? Yamamoto said, about kung fu. He paused. He said, he was right to disagree. And then he showed me why. The journalist asked, who was he? Yamamoto said, his name was Bruce Lee. The journalist said, the actor? Yamamoto looked at him. He said, in that room. That evening. He was not an actor. He paused. He said, my hand touched the floor. The journalist said, meaning? Yefu. Yamamoto said, meaning he made 380 pounds touch the floor. He paused. And then he told me about my left foot. And then he spent 3 mornings at the Kokugikan, showing me things about my own body that 16 years of sumo had not shown me. He was quiet. He said, I retired undefeated. He looked at the journalist. I was a better wrestler in my last 3 years than in my first 13. He paused. That is because of one evening in October, 1971. He picked up his tea. He said, "Find out everything you can about what he was, what he practiced, how he saw." He said, "It will be worth your time." Tokyo, October 1971. A dinner, a disagreement, a private room, 380 pounds and 135 pounds, one hand on the floor, 3 mornings at the Kokugikan, and a grand champion